There is a kind of exhaustion that nobody talks about. Not the exhaustion that comes from working too hard or sleeping too little. Not the exhaustion that a vacation can fix or a good night of rest can heal. This is a deeper exhaustion, a soul exhaustion. The kind that settles into your chest after years of trying to make people see you clearly, trying to explain yourself to people who were never really listening, trying to justify your feelings to people who had already decided how they felt about you, trying to show the world who you really are, only to watch it project onto you whatever version of you was most convenient for its own narrative. This is the exhaustion of the chronically misunderstood. And if you have ever felt it, if you have ever lain awake at night, replaying a conversation in your head, wondering why they could not just see what you were trying to say, if you have ever felt invisible in a room full of people who think they know you, if you have ever shrunk yourself to fit into someone else's understanding of who you are, then what I am about to tell you is going to change something fundamental in the way you move through the world. Because there is a moment, a specific, identifiable, life-altering moment that arrives in the lives of certain people, not all people, but the ones who have suffered enough, grown enough, and become honest enough with themselves to receive it. And in that moment, they stop. They stop explaining. They stop justifying. They stop trying to make people understand them. And in that stopping, in that profound and terrifying act of letting go, everything changes. Not because the world suddenly starts treating them better. Not because the people around them suddenly develop the capacity to see them clearly, but because they discover something that the world had been hiding from them their entire lives. That the desperate need to be understood was never really about the other person at all. It was about them. It was about a wound so old and so deep that they had forgotten it was there. It was about a relationship with themselves that had been so broken, so neglected, so thoroughly outsourced to the opinions of others, that they had lost all contact with who they actually were. And when they stop trying to be understood by the world, they begin for the first time to understand themselves. And that changes everything. Let me take you back to the beginning of this story, because this wound does not appear in adulthood. It does not emerge from a single conversation or a single relationship. It is built slowly, over years, beginning in the earliest moments of your life, in the moments before you even had language to describe what was happening to you. Think about what it means to be a child. You arrive in this world with an inner world that is extraordinarily rich, extraordinarily complex, extraordinarily alive. You have feelings that are intense and overwhelming and real. You have perceptions that are unique. You have a way of experiencing reality that belongs entirely to you and to no one else. And from the very beginning, you are engaged in a fundamental project. The project of making the people around you understand your inner world. When you cry, you are saying something is happening inside me and I need you to understand it. When you laugh, you are saying I am experiencing something wonderful and I want you to share it. When you reach out your arms, you are saying I need connection. I need to be known. I need to feel that my inner world matters to someone outside of me. This need to be understood is not a weakness. It is one of the most fundamental and beautiful aspects of human nature. We are social creatures. We are wired for connection, and connection is impossible without understanding. You cannot truly connect with someone who does not see you. You can coexist with them. You can be polite with them. You can share a house or a workplace or a life with them, but you cannot connect with them. Not really. Not in the way that makes you feel less alone in the universe. And so from the beginning, from the very first moments of your existence, you are trying to be understood. And sometimes it works. Sometimes the people around you do see you, do hear you, do make you feel that your inner world is real and valid and worthy of attention, and in those moments something inside you relaxes. Something settles. Some deep hunger is at least temporarily fed. But then there are the other moments. The moments when you try to communicate your inner world and no one receives it. The moments when you express a feeling and someone dismisses it. The moments when you show someone who you really are and they respond not with recognition but with confusion, or worse, with judgment. And in those moments something inside you learns a lesson. A lesson that you were never consciously taught but absorbed nonetheless. The lesson that your inner world is somehow wrong, somehow too much, somehow not what people want to deal with. And so you begin to adjust, you begin to edit yourself, you begin to present a version of yourself that is more acceptable, more palatable, more easily understood by the people around you. And this editing, this self-censorship, this gradual shrinking of your authentic self to fit within the boundaries of other people's understanding, is the beginning of one of the most painful and most common human experiences, the experience of feeling fundamentally, chronically, perhaps permanently misunderstood. Now here is where it gets psychologically interesting, because most people think that the pain of being misunderstood is caused by other people's failure to understand them. They think, if only the people around me were more perceptive, more empathetic, more emotionally intelligent, they would see me as I really am. And then I would feel okay. And then the hunger would be satisfied. And then I could relax into myself and stop feeling this constant nagging sense of invisibility. But this is where the story takes a turn that most people never see coming, because the truth is that the pain of being misunderstood is not primarily caused by other people's inability to see you. It is caused by your own inability to see yourself. Let me explain what I mean by that, because this is one of the most important things I will say in this entire conversation. When you are chronically invested in being understood by others, when your emotional well-being rises and falls based on whether the people around you seem to get you, you are outsourcing your self-knowledge. You are essentially saying, I do not know who I am, please tell me. I do not know if my feelings are valid, please confirm them. I do not know if my perceptions are accurate. Please verify them. You are using other people's understanding of you as a substitute for your own understanding of yourself. And this creates a dependency that is both psychologically devastating and practically impossible to satisfy, because no one can ever fully understand another person. Not completely, not perfectly. The inner world of a human being is so vast, so complex, so layered with contradictions and nuances and experiences that it is fundamentally impossible for any other person to comprehend it entirely. Even the most empathetic, most perceptive, most loving person in your life is working with an incomplete picture of who you are. They are seeing a projection, a shadow, a reflection. They are not seeing you, not the real you, not the full you, and when you base your sense of being known, being valid, being real, on their incomplete perception of you, you are building your house on sand. You are creating a self that is perpetually at the mercy of other people's limitations. And you will spend your entire life chasing a feeling of being understood that, by its very nature, can never be fully achieved through external means. The Stoics understood this with a depth and clarity that continues to astonish me every time I return to their writings. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect." And at first glance, this might not seem directly related to what we are discussing, but look at it again. Never esteem anything as of advantage to you. He is talking about what you value, what you give your energy to, what you organize your life around. And the desperate need to be understood by others, the kind of need that makes you break your own word, that makes you shrink yourself, that makes you perform and edit and self-censor and lose your self-respect in the pursuit of someone else's approval. This is exactly what Marcus was warning against. He was saying that anything that costs you your self-respect is not an advantage, no matter how good it feels in the moment, no matter how desperately you want it. The approval of another person is not worth the loss of your own integrity. The feeling of being understood by someone who can only ever understand you partially and imperfectly is not worth the ongoing sacrifice of your authentic self. And this is radical. This is genuinely, profoundly radical, because we live in a culture that tells us the opposite. We live in a culture that says relationships are the source of meaning, that being known by others is the highest form of human experience, that loneliness is the greatest suffering. And while there is truth in all of these things, there is also a dangerous distortion, because the culture never tells you what kind of relationships create meaning. It never tells you what healthy being known actually looks like. It never tells you that the loneliness you feel when you are surrounded by people who do not understand you is infinitely more painful than the solitude you feel when you are alone, but deeply connected to yourself. Epictetus, who, as I mentioned earlier, was born into slavery and spent his early life in conditions most of us cannot imagine, arrived at a philosophy of inner freedom that began with a single devastating insight. He divided all of existence into two categories: things that are within our power and things that are not within our power. He said, are our thoughts, our judgments, our desires, our aversions. Not within our power are our bodies, our reputations, our possessions, and crucially, other people's opinions of us. This distinction, which sounds simple, which might even sound obvious when you first hear it, is actually one of the most psychologically liberating ideas that any human being has ever articulated. Because most people spend the vast majority of their energy trying to control things that are not within their power. They spend enormous amounts of time and effort trying to manage how they are perceived, trying to shape other people's opinions of them, trying to make themselves understood by people who may not have the capacity or the willingness to understand them. And all of this effort, all of this energy, all of this desperate striving is directed at something that is fundamentally, categorically outside of their control. You cannot make someone understand you. You can explain yourself clearly. You can communicate with vulnerability and precision. You can do everything right. And still, at the end of it, the other person will understand you only to the degree that their own psychology, their own experiences, their own wounds and biases and limitations allow them to. Their understanding of you is their business, not yours. And the moment you truly accept this, the moment it stops being an intellectual concept and becomes a lived, felt, embodied truth, something inside you releases. Something you have been holding for perhaps your entire life finally lets go. And you are free, not free from loneliness, not free from the desire for connection, but free from the tyranny of needing people to understand you in order to feel okay about yourself. Let me describe to you what this freedom actually looks like in practice, because I do not want this to remain abstract. I want you to see it. I want you to feel it. Imagine someone who has lived their entire life feeling misunderstood. Perhaps they are the thoughtful one in a family of people who value action over reflection. Perhaps they are the sensitive one in a social group that equates sensitivity with weakness. Perhaps they are the creative one in a world that values productivity over imagination. And for years, decades perhaps, they have been trying to bridge the gap. They have been explaining their perspective endlessly. They have been trying to translate their inner world into a language that the people around them can receive. They have been twisting themselves into shapes they were never meant to inhabit, trying to become someone their family can understand, their colleagues can appreciate, their friends can relate to, and they are exhausted, not dramatically exhausted, not in a way that anyone around them even notices, just quietly, persistently, deeply tired. Tired of the effort, tired of the performance, tired of the gap between who they are inside and who they present to the world. And then one day something happens. It might be a conversation that finally goes nowhere despite every effort. It might be a moment of recognition while reading a book or watching a film. It might be a night of absolute solitude when the silence becomes so complete that there is nothing left to do but face themselves honestly. And in that moment, they make a decision. Not loudly, not dramatically, they simply decide to stop. Stop explaining. Stop justifying. Stop trying. And in that stopping, in that exhausted, humble, terrifying act of surrender, they encounter themselves for perhaps the first time, without the performance, without the editing, without the constant monitoring of how they are being received, just themselves, raw and real and unmediated, and it is terrifying, and it is painful. And it is also, beneath all of that, an enormous relief. Because here is what they discover in that encounter with themselves. They discover that they are more interesting than any version they have ever presented to the world. They discover thoughts they never allowed themselves to think, feelings they never allowed themselves to feel, desires they never allowed themselves to acknowledge, because they were so busy managing how they were perceived that they had no bandwidth left for actually experiencing their own inner life. They discover that much of what they believed about themselves was not actually their belief at all. It was someone else's assessment that they had internalized so deeply that they had mistaken it for self-knowledge. The belief that they were too sensitive, too intense, too complicated, too much. These were not truths they had discovered through honest self-examination. These were labels that other people had applied to them because they did not have the capacity to meet them where they were. And now, in the silence of stopping, in the freedom of no longer performing for an audience, they can begin the extraordinary work of finding out who they actually are, not who their parents needed them to be, not who their culture approved of, not who their relationships required, but who they are when no one is watching, when no one is judging, when no one is waiting for them to make sense in someone else's framework. This is one of the most profound journeys a human being can undertake, and it begins not with action but with stillness, not with speaking but with silence, not with reaching outward but with turning inward, not with the desperate, exhausting effort to be understood by others, but with the patient, courageous, transformative work of understanding yourself. Seneca wrote in one of his letters, "Withdraw into yourself as much as you can. Associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those who you yourself can improve." The process is mutual, for men learn while they teach. There is so much in this short passage that speaks directly to what we are exploring. Withdraw into yourself, not forever, not in a way that severs you from the world, but enough to find the ground of your own being. Enough to stop confusing other people's perceptions of you with the truth of who you are. Enough to build a relationship with yourself that is so solid, so honest, so genuinely caring, that it can no longer be fundamentally disrupted by someone else's failure to see you clearly. And then, from that solid ground, choose your associations deliberately. Not based on who is available, who is familiar, who has always been in your life, but based on who actually makes you better, who challenges you, who sees you not perfectly because no one sees you perfectly, but honestly, who is interested in the truth of who you are rather than the convenience of who you appear to be. And notice that Seneca includes you in this equation too. Not just seek those who improve you, but be someone who improves others. This is the radical shift from self-absorption to genuine relationship. When you stop being desperate to be understood, when you stop making every interaction about the question of whether or not this person gets me, you suddenly have enormous amounts of energy available for something far more beautiful. You become genuinely curious about the other person. You become genuinely interested in understanding them rather than in being understood. And paradoxically, this is precisely when you become understood. Not because you are chasing it, but because your genuine attention and curiosity create the conditions in which real mutual understanding becomes possible. Now I want to explore a paradox that sits at the heart of everything we are discussing, because I think it is one of the most beautiful and most counterintuitive truths in all of human psychology. The harder you try to make someone understand you, the less they understand you. And the moment you stop trying, the moment you simply become yourself without any agenda of being received in a particular way, people begin to see you more clearly than they ever did when you were performing for their understanding. Why does this happen? The answer lies in the nature of authentic presence. When you are in explaining mode, when you are managing how you are perceived, when you are carefully constructing the version of yourself that you want the other person to see, you are not actually present. You are in your head. You are monitoring, calculating, adjusting, editing in real time, and the other person feels this. They may not consciously identify it, but they sense it. They sense that they are receiving a performance rather than a person. They sense the gap between the curated version you are presenting and the real you underneath. And this gap creates distance. It creates a kind of invisible barrier between you and genuine connection. Because authentic connection is only possible between authentic people. It cannot happen between a person and a performance. But when you stop trying to be understood, when you simply allow yourself to be who you are without apology, without explanation, without management, something shifts in the quality of your presence. You become real in a way that is almost tangible. People feel it. They feel that they are actually with you, not with a version of you. And this authenticity, this unmanaged, unedited, fully present version of you is paradoxically far more understandable, far more relatable, far more compelling than any carefully constructed presentation ever was. Because people do not connect with perfection. They do not connect with curation. They connect with reality, with humanness, with the honest imperfect. sometimes contradictory truth of a real person showing up without a mask. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that I believe is one of the most important sentences in the entire history of philosophy. He wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Simple, direct, devastating in its implications. Because think about how much of what you say and do is driven not by what is right or true, but by the need to be understood, to be liked, to be approved of. Think about the conversations you have had where you said what you thought the other person wanted to hear, rather than what you actually believed. Think about the versions of your story you have told, carefully edited to present yourself in the most sympathetic light, to make sure the other person understood you as the hero rather than the complicated, sometimes wrong, sometimes confused human being that you actually are. Think about the times you have apologized for things you did not believe were wrong simply because the other person could not understand why you were not apologizing. All of this, every single one of these moments, represents a violation of Marcus's principle. You said something that was not true. You did something that was not right. And you did it in service of the need to be understood. And what was the cost? The cost was your integrity. The cost was your self-respect. The cost was a small but real betrayal of your own inner world, repeated over and over, thousands of times across years and decades, until you could no longer clearly distinguish between what you actually thought and felt and believed and what you had learned to perform for the people around you. And this is perhaps the most devastating consequence of the compulsive need to be understood. Not that it fails, though it does fail. Not that it exhausts you, though it does exhaust you. But that it gradually, incrementally, almost imperceptibly erodes your relationship with your own truth, until one day you reach for yourself and find that you are not entirely sure who is there. This is the crisis that the moment we are discussing resolves. The moment you stop trying to be understood is the moment you begin the journey back to yourself, back to the thoughts you actually think, back to the feelings you actually feel, back to the values you actually hold when no one is watching, back to the person who existed before the editing began. And this journey is not comfortable. Let me be absolutely clear about that. Because when you stop performing for other people's understanding, when you withdraw the carefully managed presentation of yourself, what you are left with is the raw, unprocessed, unvalidated truth of your own experience. And some of that truth is beautiful. Some of it is strength and depth and wisdom and creativity and love that you never knew you possessed because you were too busy managing how you were perceived to actually inhabit those qualities. But some of it is also painful. Some of it is the grief you never processed because you were busy managing the story of what happened. Some of it is the anger you suppressed because you needed people to see you as even-tempered and easy to be around. Some of it is the fear you minimize because you needed people to see you as confident and capable. All of the emotions and experiences that you edited your presentation in order to be more understandable, more palatable, more acceptable, they are still in there. They did not go anywhere. They have been waiting. And when the performance stops, when the managing stops, when the need to be understood releases its grip on your behavior, all of that material rises to the surface. And you have to feel it, really feel it, without using other people's understanding of you as a container for it. Without the validation of someone saying, "Yes, I understand why you feel that way." Without the comfort of being seen in your pain by someone who cares. Just you, alone with your own experience. And this is where the real courage is required, because this is the moment when most people turn back. This is the moment when the discomfort of genuine self-examination becomes so great that the old strategies start to look attractive again. Maybe if I just explained it better. Maybe if I just found the right person who could really understand me. Maybe if I just tried harder. And the pull of those thoughts is strong. Because the alternative, sitting alone with your own unvalidated experience, trusting your own perceptions without external confirmation, building a self-concept that does not depend on anyone else's agreement, this is genuinely hard work. It requires a level of self-trust that most people have never been taught to develop. It requires a kind of inner authority that feels presumptuous to those who were raised to believe that truth is always determined externally, by parents, by authorities, by consensus, by the approval of people we respect. But this is exactly the work that the Stoics were pointing toward. This is what self-knowledge means, not just knowing your personality type, or your love language, or your attachment style, but knowing your own experience well enough to trust it without external validation. Knowing your own values well enough to act on them without external permission. Knowing your own mind well enough to rest in it without constant external confirmation that you are thinking correctly. Aristotle, who approached these questions from a slightly different angle than the Stoics, but arrived at complementary conclusions, wrote about the concept of eudaimonia, which is usually translated as happiness, but more accurately means flourishing, living well in the deepest sense. And for Aristotle, eudaimonia was not a feeling, it was not something that happened to you, it was an activity, it was the ongoing, active expression of your highest capacities, and crucially it was intrinsic. It could not be given to you by another person, it could not be taken from you by another person, it was something you did or did not do from the inside. And the person who is desperately seeking to be understood by others is, in Aristotle's framework, living in the opposite of eudaimonia, because they have made their flourishing dependent on something external. They have placed the source of their well-being outside of themselves, in the hands of people who may or may not have the capacity to provide what they need. And this is a recipe not for flourishing but for suffering, for the chronic, persistent, soul-level suffering of someone who is always waiting, always hoping, always almost satisfied but never quite, because the satisfaction they are seeking is not available in the place they are looking for it. It was never there, it was always inside. And no amount of external understanding can access it. Only self-understanding can. Let me tell you what changes in your relationships when you stop trying to be understood. Because this is where the paradox becomes most beautiful and most practical. When you release the desperate need to be understood, you become genuinely curious about other people. And this curiosity, this real, authentic, agenda-free interest in the inner world of another human being, is the most magnetic and most connecting quality a person can possess. Think about the people in your life who have made you feel most understood. Were they the ones who were constantly explaining themselves to you? Were they the ones who were always seeking your validation? Were they the ones who steered every conversation back to the question of whether you really got where they were coming from? Or were they the ones who listened? Who asked questions with genuine curiosity? Who seemed genuinely interested in your experience without immediately relating it to their own? Who made you feel that your inner world mattered, not because they were performing empathy, but because they were actually interested? Almost always, the people who make us feel most understood are the ones who are least focused on being understood themselves. They have done their own inner work. They are comfortable with themselves. They are not using the conversation to get something. And so they are fully available to give something. Their attention, their presence, their genuine interest. And this creates the conditions in which understanding, real understanding, the mutual, bidirectional, deeply satisfying understanding that we have been chasing our entire lives actually becomes possible. This is not a small thing. This is a complete revolution in how you relate to the world. Because right now, if you are someone who suffers from the chronic need to be understood, every relationship in your life is subtly colored by that need. Every conversation has an undercurrent of "Are you seeing me?" Every interaction carries the implicit question of "Do you get it? Do you get me?" And this undercurrent creates a particular kind of relational dynamic. It creates interactions that feel slightly off, slightly desperate, slightly too intense, because there is an agenda beneath them that the other person may sense without being able to name. And it creates a kind of relational exhaustion in the people around you, who may genuinely like you, genuinely care about you, but who feel the subtle pressure of your need and do not quite know how to meet it. And when you release that need, when you stop bringing that agenda to your relationships, everything shifts. The conversations become lighter, more genuine, more equal. The people around you relax in a way they may never have around you before, because the subtle pressure of your need has lifted. And you relax too, because you are no longer working, you are no longer performing, you are no longer monitoring and managing and hoping and waiting. You are simply there, present, open. And in that presence, in that openness, The connection you have been seeking your entire life begins to arrive. Not because you finally explained yourself well enough. Not because you finally found someone perceptive enough to see you completely, but because you stopped getting in your own way. Because you stopped blocking genuine connection with the desperate pursuit of connection. Because you became the kind of person who does not need to be understood, and paradoxically, that made you profoundly easy to understand. I want to tell you about something that happens to the inner life of a person who makes this shift. Something that is rarely talked about, but that I think is one of the most remarkable and most precious consequences of releasing the need for external understanding. When you stop outsourcing your self-knowledge to other people's perceptions of you, you develop what I can only describe as an inner conversation, a genuine, honest, rich dialogue with yourself. Not the obsessive, circular, self-critical inner monologue that most people call thinking, but a real conversation. The kind where you can ask yourself a question and sit with it patiently, without needing an answer immediately. The kind where you can acknowledge a contradiction in yourself without immediately needing to resolve it or explain it to someone else.
The kind where you can hold complexity and ambiguity and uncertainty with a kind of curious, compassionate attention that does not demand resolution.
This inner conversation is the beginning of genuine self-knowledge. And genuine self-knowledge is the beginning of everything. It is the beginning of making decisions that are actually aligned with who you are, rather than who you think other people need you to be. It is the beginning of relationships that are genuinely mutual, because you actually know yourself well enough to show up authentically rather than performing. It is the beginning of a creative and intellectual life that is driven by your actual curiosity and passion, rather than by what is most likely to be approved of. It is the beginning of a kind of quiet confidence that has nothing to do with arrogance or superiority, but everything to do with the simple, solid, deeply grounding experience of knowing yourself and trusting what you know. Marcus Aurelius practiced this inner conversation every single day. His meditations, which were never intended for publication, were precisely this: a man talking to himself, honestly, rigorously, without performance. Without the need to present a flattering version of himself, he confronted his weaknesses. He questioned his motivations. He challenged his own assumptions. He held himself accountable to his own highest values without waiting for anyone else to do it for him. And this practice, this daily, disciplined, honest conversation with himself, was the foundation of everything else about him. It was why he could rule an empire without losing himself in the corrupting influence of power. It was why he could face tremendous personal suffering, the deaths of children, the betrayal of friends, the endless grind of war and governance, without being broken by it. It was why he could be surrounded by sycophants and flatterers and still maintain a clear, honest perception of reality, because he was not dependent on external perception for his sense of who he was. He knew himself. He trusted himself. He had built a relationship with his own inner world that was so solid, so genuinely honest, so rooted in consistent self-examination that it could not be fundamentally disturbed by what other people thought about him, or said about him, or understood about him. And this is available to you, not through any technique or strategy, but through the same practice, through the daily, honest, courageous work of turning your attention inward and asking the questions that most people are too afraid to ask themselves. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I actually value, as opposed to what I perform valuing? What do I feel? Beneath the layer of what I think I should feel, what do I want? Beneath the layer of what I think I am allowed to want. These questions are terrifying. They are also the most important questions you will ever ask, because the answers, whatever they are the beginning of your real life, the life that is actually yours. Not the life you have been performing for the understanding of others. There is something I want to address directly, because I know it is the objection that has been building in some of you throughout this conversation. You might be thinking, but what about genuine connection? What about love? What about the real, deep, soul-level intimacy of being truly known by another person? Are you saying I should give that up? Are you saying I should stop wanting to be understood? And the answer is absolutely not. I am not saying that. Real connection, genuine intimacy, the experience of being truly seen by another person, These are among the most precious and most profoundly human experiences available to us. I am not asking you to renounce them. I am asking you to understand where they actually come from, because here is the truth about genuine intimacy. It does not come from successfully explaining yourself to someone until they finally understand you. It does not come from finding the perfect words to bridge the gap between your inner world and theirs. It does not come from choosing the right relationship and working hard enough to be understood within it. It comes from two people who each have a solid, honest, grounded relationship with themselves, coming together in mutual curiosity and genuine care. It comes from two people who are not using each other to fill the gap of their own incomplete self-knowledge. It comes from two people who are, each in their own way, free. Free from the desperate need to be understood, which means they can offer something infinitely more valuable than understanding. They can offer presence, real presence. The presence of someone who is fully there, fully attentive, fully engaged, without an agenda, without a need to be fed in a particular way, without the distorting lens of their own unmet hunger for validation. And when two people meet in that kind of presence, when two people who have done their own work and know their own minds and trust their own experience encounter each other, something extraordinary happens. Something that no amount of desperate seeking for understanding can produce. Something that the Stoics pointed toward but that language can barely contain. Something that feels to those who have experienced it like coming home. Not to another person, but to yourself, reflected clearly in the eyes of someone who is genuinely, freely, generously there. Let me bring this full circle now, because I want to make sure that what you take away from this conversation is not just philosophical insight, but something that actually changes how you move through the world tomorrow morning. Because philosophy that does not change behavior is just intellectual entertainment. And what we have been discussing is not entertainment, it is medicine. So here is what I want you to do, not dramatically, not all at once, but beginning now, in small, quiet, deliberate ways. Start paying attention to the moments when you feel the urge to explain yourself, not to correct misinformation, not to provide genuinely useful information, not to communicate something that matters to the relationship or the situation, but simply to make someone understand you in the way you want to be understood. When you notice that urge, pause. Not to suppress it, not to judge it, but to get curious about it. What is underneath it? What are you afraid will happen if this person does not understand you in this particular way? What part of your sense of self is at stake in their perception of you? These are not rhetorical questions. Sit with them, really sit with them, and then make a choice. Not automatically, not reactively, but consciously, deliberately, from the part of you that is developing, slowly and with effort and courage, a genuine relationship with your own inner authority. Practice it every day, in small situations first, in the conversations that feel low stakes. Build the muscle gradually, because this is a practice, not a destination. It is something you get better at over time, not something you achieve once and never have to work at again. And as you practice, notice what changes. Notice the quality of your presence in conversations. Notice the quality of your attention. Notice the quality of your relationships. Notice how it feels to walk through the world as someone who is not constantly seeking validation, not constantly monitoring how they are being received, not constantly trying to close the gap between how they are perceived and how they want to be perceived. Notice how much lighter it is, how much more energy you have, how much more clearly you see, how much more genuinely you love. And then one day, not far from now, you will be in a conversation with someone, and they will misunderstand you. They will get it wrong. They will see something in you that is not quite you, or miss something in you that is entirely you. And you will feel the old familiar pull, the urge to correct the record, to explain, to make them see. And you will pause, and in that pause something extraordinary will happen. You will realize that it does not matter. Not because you do not care about this person. Not because being understood is not valuable, but because your sense of who you are does not depend on their perception of you. Because you know yourself well enough that their misunderstanding, however frustrating, however painful, cannot reach the core of you, cannot shake the ground you are standing on, cannot make you doubt the truth of your own experience. And in that moment of not needing to explain yourself, of being completely secure within your own self-knowledge, you will feel something that I cannot adequately describe, but that you will recognize instantly when you feel it. A kind of freedom so complete, so unqualified, so fundamentally different from anything you have felt before, that you will wonder how you ever lived without it. That is the moment. That is the moment when everything changes, not because the world changed, but because you finally, truly, came home to yourself, and from that home, from that deep and quiet and unshakable knowing of who you are, you can do everything. You can love without losing yourself. You can serve without depleting yourself. You can engage with the world without being consumed by it. You can be misunderstood without being diminished. You can be alone without being lonely. You can be in a crowd without disappearing. You can be exactly, fully, unapologetically who you are. And you can offer that person, that real, honest, fully inhabited person to the world, not in the hope that the world will understand them, but in the knowledge that whether the world understands them or not, they are real, they are here, they are enough. You are enough. You are always enough. And the moment you stop trying to prove it to someone else is the moment you finally begin to know it for yourself. The Stoics did not promise us a world that would treat us fairly. They did not promise that people would see us clearly or value us appropriately or understand us fully. They were too honest for that. What they promised instead was something far more valuable. They promised that regardless of what the world did or did not do, regardless of how we were treated or misunderstood or overlooked or dismissed, we had within us the capacity to be free. Not free from suffering, not free from loneliness or misunderstanding or pain, but free in our response to all of it. Free in the sovereignty of our own inner world, free in the quality of our own thoughts and the integrity of our own values and the honesty of our own self-knowledge. And this freedom, this inner freedom that no external circumstance can touch, this is what awaits you on the other side of the moment when you stop trying to be understood. This is the treasure that has been buried beneath all that exhausting, endless striving. This is what you were really looking for in all those conversations, all those explanations, all those desperate attempts to make someone see you the way you wanted to be seen, not their understanding, your own. And now, at last, you know where to find it. If something in what you have heard today landed somewhere deep, if there was a moment where something shifted, where you felt the truth of it, not just in your mind but in your body, in your chest, in that quiet place beneath all the noise where the real you lives, then you already know that this is the beginning of something important. Subscribe to this channel, not for entertainment, not for motivation, but because this is a practice. And every time we come back together, we go a little deeper, we see a little more clearly, we become a little more free. The journey has already begun. I will see you in the next one.